Hello and welcome to Music and Art in the Catholic Tradition, Video 1 for Lesson 1, Module 1. Today we're going to be talking about Plato, and specifically passages from his Republic, which help us to answer the question, or questions, what was music according to Plato? What does Plato believe music does to us? What does music do to the state? Which, of course, is really just an extrapolation of an individual into a group. What is the purpose of music based on the answers to these previous questions? What does Plato mean when he uses the term harmony? And what is he talking about when he talks about proportion? Why does he focus on proportion so much? We're also going to talk about this idea of resonance, which sort of underlies all of what Plato is talking about in these passages that we've looked at for today. So, with a brief introduction to Plato, we'll move right on to the text itself. So Plato lived in the 4th century BCE. We don't know exactly when because there are conflicting reports. We do have some reports from the time as to when he was born and when he died, but because there are others who say differently, we just can't know for sure. So, in addition to having written all these works which really become the foundation of Western philosophy, although there are philosophers before, such as Pythagoras, Plato is the first philosopher that leaves us a substantial body of works that we can engage with and digest and learn from. Plato is also notable for having founded the Academy in Athens, and of course Athens was where he made his home. Athens being, of course, the city-state in Greece that was well known for being a democracy. Moving on to the Republic itself. What is music? According to Plato. What does it consist of? Well, according to Plato, if you look here on page 71 of the PDF, and since the document itself doesn't have page numbers, I'll be referring to the PDF pages throughout. He writes, "At any rate, you can tell that a song or ode has 3 parts, the words, the melody, and the rhythm. That degree of knowledge, I may presuppose?" "Yes," he said, "so much as that you may." So he lays out this clear distinction between the parts of a piece of music. Now it's important to note that although Plato acknowledges that there is purely instrumental music, he maintains this tripartite division of music into words, music, and text. Although not all music contains text, and not all text is set to music, he sees them very closely linked. You'll notice in a few pages previous, he even goes so far as to say that literature is included in music. And so really he's talking about poetry here, but there's a very close link between the two. He's also careful to say that melody and rhythm will depend upon the words. This becomes a very important idea in the late Renaissance and the early Baroque period, when composers go back to Plato and they read this passage in the Republic and they say, wait a minute, the words are, according to Plato, the most important part of a song, and so we should be focusing on the words instead of focusing on the music. And of course that really is instrumental in the birth of opera, which we unfortunately won't really talk that much about this semester because opera is never really a big Catholic thing, although there are some sacred operas, and I will talk about one of them when we get to the Baroque era. So that's what Plato thinks music is. What does he think music does to us? Do we just enjoy it? Does it change our lives or what? Well, if you look on page 74, we get the first really clear mention of what he believes music does to us. It's down at the bottom of the page. He writes, "There can be no nobler training than that," he replied. "And therefore," I said, Glaucon, "musical training is a more potent instrument than any other, because rhythm and harmony find their way into the inward places of the soul, on which they mightily fasten, imparting grace, and making the soul of him who is rightly educated graceful, or of him who is ill-educated ungraceful. And also because he who has received this true education of the inner being will most shrewdly perceive omissions or faults in art and nature, and with a true taste, while he praises and rejoices over and receives into his soul the good, and becomes noble and good, he will justly blame and hate the bad, now in the days of his youth, even before he is able to know the reason why. And when reason comes, he will recognize and salute the friend with whom his education has made him long familiar." "Yes," he said, "I quite agree with you in thinking that our youth should be trained in music and on the grounds which you mention." So here he's saying music gets into our soul, and it changes us. It can make us good, and it can lead us to the good and the beautiful, without us even really knowing why. But bad music can get inside us as well, and change us and make us bad. And so this is one of the reasons why he's talking about music in the Republic, which is about the perfect state, the perfect society, because music can make society or break society. If music is good, it will make us all good. If music is bad, it will make us all bad, and chaos will ensue. Another example of this influence of music is on page, and what music does to us is on page 93, where he's talking about the state, previously on the previous page 92, and we get to this passage here where he says, "Why, yes," he said, "and there is no harm, were it not that little by little this spirit of license, that is, playing new types of music and adding more runs and making it more virtuosic, this spirit of license finding a home imperceptibly penetrates into manners and customs, whence, issuing with greater force, it invades and contracts between man, and from contracts goes on to laws and constitutions, in utter recklessness, ending at last, Socrates, by an overthrow of all rights, private as well as public." So not only does music in its intimate connection to us, in its fundamental frequencies and character, influence our frequency and character, but when we take license with music, we take license in other aspects of our lives until finally the law disintegrates and everything becomes chaos. Or so Plato would say. And so, what does music do to the state then? If you look back on the previous page, page 92, he says, "The newest songs which the singers have, they will be afraid that he may be praising not new songs, but a new kind of song. And this ought not to be praised or conceived to be the meaning of the poet, for any musical innovation is full of danger to the whole state, and ought to be prohibited." So Damon tells me, and I can quite believe him. He says that when modes of music change, of the state always change with them. "Yes," said Adimantus, "and you may add my suffrage to Damon's and your own." "Then," I said, "our guardians must lay the foundations of their fortress in music?" "Yes," he said, "the lawlessness of which you speak too easily steals in." And so, music is a way to regulate the state, similar to the way we might regulate it with laws. And it's a way, as I said previously, to undo the state. What is the purpose, then, of music? We've already mentioned regulation of society as a possible usage. But that is not really the essence, the essential purpose of music. If you look on page 76, he says briefly that, "Thus much of music, which makes a fair ending, for what should be the end of music, if not the love of beauty?" So yes, we can regulate society practically with music, but the real purpose of music is to lead us to beauty. to lead us to goodness, to teach us to love beauty and to love the good when it's used properly. And we've seen now what he thinks music is and how it's used and what it does to us. What does Plato think is beautiful? We've talked about a lot of practical things, right? A lot of technical things. What is it doing to us? How is it doing it to us? Why should we be afraid of it? But what about beauty? What makes music beautiful? What makes music good? Well, if you look on page 73, and it's throughout this section here, we start to talk about things that really hint at what Plato believes is beautiful. So you look at the bottom of the page, it says, "There is no difficulty in seeing that grace or the absence of grace is an effect of good or bad rhythm. None at all. And also that good and bad rhythm naturally assimilate to a good and bad style, and that harmony and discord in like manner follow style. For our principle is that rhythm and harmony are regulated by the words, and not the words by them. Just so, he said, they should follow the words. And will not the words and the character of the style depend on the temper of the soul? Yes. And everything else on the style? Yes. Then beauty of style and harmony and grace and good rhythms depend on simplicity. I mean the true simplicity of a rightly and nobly ordered mind and character, not that other simplicity which is only a euphemism for folly." "Very true," he replied. "And if our youth are to do their work in life, must they not make these graces and harmonies their perpetual aim?" They must. So, the essence of beauty, according to Plato, is order and proportion and fitness. The music, the melody, and the rhythm must fit the words. If they don't fit it, if they're not fittingly representative of its character and attuned to its character, then they are disproportionate to it and not beautiful. On the other hand, however, if there is a beautiful simplicity, if there is a simplicity, which here Plato means just enough and no more, if it is proportional, if the music and the rhythm fit the text perfectly, fit the character perfectly, then they are beautiful. And he goes on to say, of all the arts, and surely the art of the painter and every other creative and constructive art are full of them, weaving, embroidery, architecture, and every kind of manufacture, also nature, animal and vegetable. In all of them there is grace or the absence of grace, and ugliness and discord and inharmonious motion are nearly allied to ill words and ill nature, as grace and harmony are the twin sisters of goodness and virtue and bear their likeness. So harmony and proportion are related to beauty. The more harmonious, the more ordered, the more proportional something is, the more beautiful it is. And the more discordant and inharmonious, disproportional and inappropriate something is, the more ugly it is. And then on page 75 he goes on to say, "And when a beautiful soul harmonizes with a beautiful form, and the two are cast in one mold, that will be the fairest of sights to him who has an eye to see it, the fairest indeed. And the fairest is also the loveliest, that may be assured. And the man who has the spirit of harmony will be most in love with the loveliest, but he will not love him who is of an inharmonious soul. That is true." So, not only is beauty a matter of seeing a proportion, but it's also a matter of us being proportional to the thing that we are seeing, which is proportional. So it's a multi-layered take on proportion. And he also talks about moderation in practical terms and in aesthetic terms. That's where that simplicity comes in aesthetically, but he also talks about the practical application of moderation in gymnastics and music. If you are too focused on gymnastics, you'll become brutish, you'll become violent. If you're too focused on music, you'll become effeminate and lazy, according to Plato. But if you moderate them, in other words, if they are proportional to each other in your study of them, then you will become better for it. And it's because you will resonate with them proportionally, you will become proportionate. And so this is the foundation, or a significant foundation, because Aristotle adds a little wrinkle to it, which we'll discuss next time. This is the basic foundation of the Western aesthetic that becomes the Catholic aesthetic. Things need to be proportional. Things need to be fitting. They need to match the thing that they are representing. They need to match the character that they should be presenting for that situation in that context. And if things are proportional, if things are ordered, if things are harmonious, then they will be beautiful. And if they are inappropriate or inharmonious or discordant or dissonant, then they will be ugly. That's it for this lesson. Please let me know if you have any questions about it. I look forward to continuing to discuss this topic with you in the discussion forum, and I'll see you next time for Lesson 2, Video 2 of Module 1.